Hi, welcome to Intro to Philosophy Online. I'm Professor Jones Cathcart. I'll be your instructor for the semester. Now you might be asking yourself, what exactly is this course about, this Intro to Philosophy course? Well, if we go back to the Greek roots of philosophy, it comes from two words, philein meaning to love and Sophia meaning wisdom. So translated into English, that would be love of wisdom, which means a philosopher would be a lover of wisdom. But that doesn't tell you very much about what philosophy actually is. So another way of getting at that idea is to suggest that philosophy is the right way, and by right way I mean the most reasonable or logical way of thinking about the big questions that concern us as human beings. So some of those questions would include the following. What is knowledge? This is covered in a branch of philosophy we'll look at this semester called epistemology. How does knowledge differ from opinion, if indeed it does differ from opinion? What's the most reliable way of getting at the truth? For example, maybe we want to say that it's science. Or perhaps we might say that science itself has certain limitations. What about religious faith? What about intuition? What about sense perception or some appeal to authority? So that I believe something or you believe something, not because we've performed an experiment in a lab, but rather because we were told this by a friend or a colleague, or we read it in a newspaper, and so on. Another set of questions would be, what is reality? This is covered in a branch of philosophy that's called metaphysics. So what's the thing that makes something real or most real? As an example, I'm sure you'll agree that in some sense Homer Simpson is real. After all, we can talk about Homer Simpson, we can have true beliefs about Homer Simpson, but is Homer Simpson really real in the way that you and I are real? In which case, maybe we want to say there are different levels of reality, which is a metaphysical distinction that we would be making. What's the difference between appearance and reality? Is it the case that the way things appear is always the way things actually are? Is it possible, as an example, that I'm dreaming right now and that I'm not really creating some kind of mini lecture introducing this course? Maybe I'm just a brain in a vat, and I don't have arms or I have legs, and I'm being manipulated, like I'm in a matrix, or this is some kind of inception. Also, we might ask, what is real? Is everything ultimately made of atoms, protons, electrons, neutrons, energy, if you will? Or are there such things as souls or spirits? What about God? What about free will? Do we have free will? These are all metaphysical concerns. We can also ask questions about ethics. What is right and wrong, or good and bad? For example, somebody will oftentimes say slavery is wrong and freedom is right, or civil rights are right. Is that just an opinion, or is that actually a fact? Is it actually true? Is ethics more than just what we happen to want to believe about things, or are there objective moral truths that we discover in the world? What makes something right or wrong? For example, is it our society, in which case there might be one set of ethics for Americans and another set of ethics for French people and another for Russians and another for people in Thailand? Or perhaps we want to say that, yes, there is an objective right or wrong, and it's determined maybe by the consequences of our actions. Have you ever told a lie thinking that as long as you can get away with it, you've done the right thing? That's an ends justifies the means kind of view. You're saying the consequences really matter. Or maybe something else helps to define what morality is. What about some divine being? What about a god? Or maybe there's something else. So these are all ethical concerns that we'll look at in the course. Related to this, we might ask questions of a political, philosophical nature. What is a just society, right? Should we have a limited government, or should we have more government? Is any amount of government actually legitimate? If you say, no, there's no government that's legitimate at all, you're what's called an anarchist. What about rights? What sorts of rights should we have? For example, perhaps you're willing to accept that we should have rights to vote, or we should have due process rights in a court of law. But what about health care? What about a right to food? What about a right to work? And so on. Now, all of these questions and more, this is just a sample, are very difficult to find very good answers to, as we'll see. However, it's still worth investigating these questions because we want to know answers to these things. It's part of what it means to be a human being, to speculate, to wonder about these things. Also, notice none of these questions are really answered by other subjects. We won't find answers to questions about ethics or free will or God in literature or science or in studying French or in studying botany and so on. Philosophy kind of takes a step back from all those disciplines and tries to look at, you might call it, the bigger picture or the broader picture about what makes us human. Now, we do, in fact, make philosophical assumptions all the time, whether we know it or not. As an example, recently, I just had to determine whether or not I wanted to repair my car. And I found that, of course, I'm going to repair my car. It's expensive to do. I figured I'll repair it myself. I spent all this time and a little bit of money and the elbow grease and everything. And at some point I stopped and I thought, well, why am I doing this? Well, in one obvious sense, I need a car because I need to go to work. And I need to go to work because I need to pay bills, like my mortgage. And I need a mortgage because I need to be able to afford to live in my house. But then I thought, well, wait a second, why do I need a mortgage? Why do I need to live in a house? Couldn't I just be perfectly happy living in a tent somewhere? And why do I have to go off and work at that particular job? Why work at all? Well, I guess because I like to teach. But why? Are there other things that I could possibly do? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I took to be perfectly obvious, I have to fix my car, wasn't really all that obvious at all. I was making all these assumptions which led me down a certain kind of path. Now, I did, in fact, fix my car, and then it broke again. And then I traded it in and I got another car because I decided on reflection that all those things I just mentioned really do matter to me, like my mortgage. But isn't it important to think about these things, think about why we do the things that we do, why we place a value on the things that we value? Another question we might ask is, well, you pick up a newspaper or you more often times than not nowadays you read something online and somebody has committed some crime. They've robbed a bank or they've murdered a person. And your first thought might be, well, that was wrong. But again, what's involved in making that claim? Well, we have to assume that people have free will. We have to assume that people could act differently than they might otherwise do. We wouldn't normally say that an animal acting just on instinct or a computer acting on a program is free and is morally responsible. So obviously, in saying that human beings are responsible, we have to be making assumptions about what it means to be human. So these questions, broadly construed, are all philosophical questions. Now, looking at this course, I spoke a little bit about the content of the course, these kinds of philosophical questions. But let's talk a little bit about the format of the course. Now, as you know, the entire course is online. And that means, of course, you'll be contacting me online. For that reason, it's also easy to fall behind in a course like this, since we won't be in a traditional classroom, day in, day out, week in, week out. It might be easy not to be motivated to do reading without a teacher or your peers looking over your shoulder to see how hard you're working and so on. And, of course, it's perfectly natural in any course, especially in philosophy, to become confused with certain questions, and so on. Now, it's very important to me, and to you, I presume, to succeed in this course. And that's why I want to encourage you, whenever you feel that you're falling behind in the course, or you have questions about any of the material in the course, or any questions at all about your education, please reach out and contact me as soon as possible. Don't delay, don't wait. The sooner you do it, the better. Now, I would encourage you initially to look over the course, look over the syllabus, look over the discussion forums, look over the assignments, so you have some general idea of where things are in the course and what's expected of you and when these assignments are due. A last point would be, we want to create a community here. Now, in a traditional classroom, this is sort of handled in some ways by the simple fact that people are physically involved with each other. They're in close proximity in the same room. In our case, we have to do a little extra work to introduce ourselves online, to convey a sense of respect to people that in many cases we'll never meet. We might never have any idea about what one another looks like. And so I would encourage you to reach out to your peers, to always convey an attitude of respect, and to be genuinely inquisitive about other people's opinions and about how they're responding to the material. Philosophy is especially good at allowing people to develop a sense of community and a sense of inquiry together. Above all else, last point, please have fun. And with that, I'd like to introduce philosophy to you during this semester.